On June 6, 1944, hundreds of thousands of Allied troops, planes and ships departed from their bases in England, bound for the shores of France in what was to be the greatest invasion of all time. Plans for the massive operation had begun months before, in both London and Washington, D.C. A major part of the planning rested on an elaborate, multifaceted deception operation, one designed to fool the Germans about where the actual invasion was to take place. Allied intelligence officials had convinced the Germans that the invasion would occur at the Pas de Calais, about 150 miles northeast of Normandy, the true landing site. In 1943, 1 year before D-Day, the British intelligence services launched a complex deception campaign throughout France, meant to mislead the Germans into believing that the invasion would strike in the spring and summer, centred in the northwest of the country. The code name for the men and women who carried out this dangerous deception was Prosper. By the time the war ended, however, the entire Prosper network had been killed or captured, whether by cruel design or tragic happenstance. The originator of the Prosper mission was the super-secret British intelligence unit known as the Special Operations Executive, or SOE. The SOE's primary mission was to aid the resistance fighters in occupied Europe by any means possible: assassination, sabotage, guerrilla warfare, and direct attacks on German military and industrial targets. The SOE had been given its mandate by Winston Churchill himself, who ordered them to set Europe ablaze, and that they surely did. A special division within British intelligence, called F Section, or the French Section, was created, devoted entirely to aiding resistance groups across France. As the war went on, more than 80 independent resistance networks took shape, from the rugged hills of the Pyrenees to the narrow streets of Paris and along Hitler's mighty Atlantic Wall. Prosper, led by Francis Suttill, was one of these networks. Francis Suttill was of Anglo-French origin, born in Lille, France, in 1910. A lawyer before the war, he served in the East Surrey Regiment of the British Army. When war broke out, he was assigned to F Section and soon placed in charge of the growing Prosper network, a vast web stretching across France. Suttill was given just 7 months of training in the dark arts of secret warfare before being sent into the field. His mission? To build a clandestine resistance organisation throughout northern, southern and eastern France, including the capital Paris, then under German occupation. His cover identity was that of a man named François Desprez, a businessman dealing in agricultural produce. His forged papers described him as born in Lille in 1910 to French and Belgian parents. Along with this new identity, F Section gave him his own secret code name, Prosper, inspired by a 15th century author and destined to become one of the most tragic names in the history of Allied espionage. F Section's main training base for these new agents was at Gibraltar Farm, Tempsford, in Buckinghamshire, about 40 miles outside London. On October 1st, 1942, Francis Suttill arrived at the Manston Air Base for his secret flight to France. Accompanying him was Maurice Buckmaster, the commander of F Section, who had come to personally see off his principal agent. Buckmaster had worked tirelessly to establish F Section's logistics and operational methods, which included several hidden airfields across England. There, skilled RAF pilots and ground controllers ensured that agents could be flown covertly into and out of occupied France. These secret flights also carried vital mail and intelligence between Britain and the French underground. One of the most gifted of these air controllers was a French officer named Henri Dericourt. His primary duty in the Prosper operation was to oversee and control all clandestine air traffic in and out of Paris and its surrounding regions. Over time, however, Dericourt would become one of the most controversial figures in the entire history of the Prosper network. On that dark, windswept night in October 1942, Suttill parachuted into German-occupied France, landing near the town of Vendôme, about 110 miles from Paris. From there, he began recruiting men and women who would form the heart of his network. Their code names were as diverse as their talents: physician, donkeyman, bricklayer, chestnut, priest, cinema, and orator. Within a year, Suttill had built a secret army of more than 10,000 covert operatives scattered across France. These brave individuals maintained mail lines, ran espionage networks, organised medical aid, and operated wireless transmitters sending precious intelligence back to England. How Henri Dericourt came to the attention of Buckmaster's F-Section has long been shrouded in controversy. Most historians believe that Dericourt was introduced by Air Commodore Archibald Boyle, head of intelligence at the Air Ministry. Boyle, in turn, had heard of Dericourt through Claude Danzy, a feared and divisive figure within British intelligence, infamous for his ruthless efficiency. Danzy was Vice Chief of the British SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service, and controlled thousands of agents across Europe. He also oversaw the mysterious Z organisation, an operation so secret it functioned without the knowledge of the SIS itself. Regardless of how Dericourt was brought in, his covert role within F-Section was to infiltrate the German Sicherheitsdienst, the counter-espionage headquarters in Paris. What few in British intelligence realised, however, was that Dericourt already had a secret relationship with Hans Böhmelberg, the head of German counterintelligence in France. On the night of January the 22nd, 1943, Dericourt parachuted into France. He made his way to Marseille, reunited with his wife, and together they travelled to Paris, where they took a room at the Hotel Bristol. The hotel was notorious as a hub for German SD officers. Curiously, despite living in the very heart of Nazi intelligence activity, Dericourt remained undisturbed. The Germans made no move to arrest him, a fact that raised troubling questions. Why would the SD allow a known British agent to live so openly under their noses? Reports after the war revealed that Dericourt had in fact met with Hans Böhmelberg while in Paris, and that he had divulged his true mission to him. Even worse, he was said to have handed over the locations of 14 clandestine airfields, used by the SOE to drop agents and supplies into France. While Dericourt made his secret arrangements for SOE flights, preparations were also underway to send in more members of the Prosper network. One of the first to arrive was Jack Agazarian, a skilled SOE radio operator. He parachuted into France in December 1942 and was later joined by his wife, Francine. Together, they worked closely with Dericourt, helping to coordinate secret landing grounds for RAF missions. But as time passed, Agazarian began to grow suspicious. Something about Dericourt's behaviour didn't add up. Reluctantly, he sent warnings back to London, voicing his fears that Dericourt might be betraying them. Francis Suttill shared his concerns. Through whispers from his agents in Paris, he began to suspect that Prosper itself had been compromised. On June 16th, 1943, Agazarian returned to London to report on the situation. He met with Maurice Buckmaster and Nicholas Boddington, a former Reuters journalist now serving as Buckmaster's deputy. During their meetings, Agazarian urged them to investigate Dericourt's possible treachery. But Buckmaster and Boddington dismissed his warnings outright. Ironically, after the war, Boddington himself would write of Dericourt. We know he's in contact with the Germans, and also how and why. After the war, conflicting theories emerged about who truly betrayed the Prosper network. When Francis Suttill was captured, he was taken to Paris and interrogated by SS officer Hans-Josef Kiefer, head of the Sicherheitsdienst SD, counter-espionage service. For nearly 3 days, Suttill endured brutal questioning without rest, food, or water. Kiefer's primary goal was to learn when and where the Allied invasion of Europe would occur, but Suttill never broke. Kiefer had more success with Gilbert Norman, Prosper's wireless operator. Under severe torture, Norman eventually divulged critical information, including the locations of F-Section's secret airfields across France, and, possibly, the identities of fellow SOE agents. Following these interrogations, Kiefer proposed a deal to both Suttill and Norman. In exchange for their cooperation, he would spare the lives of any Prosper members who might later be captured. But the Germans broke that promise. Both Suttill and Norman were eventually executed, and scores of their comrades met the same fate. Strangely, Henri Dericourt, whose loyalty had long been in question, suffered no consequences. Despite strong suspicions that he was collaborating with the Germans, no punitive action was taken. In fact, Nicholas Boddington, Suttill's superior in F-Section, secretly travelled to France to meet with Dericourt. This, despite the fact that the Gestapo had placed a £10,000 bounty on Boddington's head. Remarkably, Dericourt protected Boddington's location from Kiefer, allowing him to return safely to London. This strange web of contradictions only deepened the mystery. Who truly betrayed Prosper, and why? Some historians have speculated that British intelligence may have deliberately sacrificed the network to deceive the Germans about the timing and location of the D-Day invasion. Others have gone further, suggesting that both Delacour and Boddington might have been double agents, simultaneously serving the interests of both Britain and Nazi Germany. In February 1944, Delacour was recalled to London and interrogated about his role in the collapse of Prosper. A formal court of inquiry was convened by Air Commodore Archibald Boyle and SOE Vice Chief H.N. Sporborg. During questioning, Delacour admitted to his dealings with the SD but claimed he had only pretended to collaborate with them as part of his cover. Despite this admission and the devastating consequences of his actions, he faced no punishment. 2 years later, in 1946, Delacour was arrested at a British airport carrying gold, platinum, and £1,400 in cash. He was charged in court but ultimately released after his defence argued that he had been acting on behalf of British intelligence. And so, the story of the Prosper network ends not with justice, but with ambiguity. The deaths of Major Francis Suttill, Gilbert Norman, and hundreds of braver SOE agents remain shrouded in mystery. A web of espionage, betrayal, and unanswered questions that continues to haunt the history of World War II.